So, what kind of student were you in high school?
I was a very serious student in the sense that I took the classes that I liked. I took them very seriously in the sense that I loved learning. I was obsessed with history. I loved
Indulge
literature.
in the course.
Totally. I never was a dismissive student. At the same time, I was really quite rebellious. I went to a boarding school in British Columbia called Brentwood, and I learned a lot about human nature. I think I learned as much about human nature in high school
Oh, really?
than I did in any other, because you're kind of stripped raw in high school, aren't you? And emotions are on the surface. Everybody's sort of coming of age.
Trying to figure out
where you be,
and
and there's all this sort of peer pressure just at a time when you want to become an individual. So I think high school is a really fantastic time. I never felt in high school, looking back, that I was a high school kid. I always felt like I was
older,
independent,
mature.
old, and I mean, I wasn't at one level, but at one level I really was. It certainly prepared me for going off to a very intense university.
How do you gain the trust of the people that you study?
That's a wonderful question, Chelsea. People often, particularly all this nonsense about Indiana Jones and everything, and that kind of thing, they assume it's somehow this bravado thing. No, it's the complete opposite. When you go into a culture, and one of the things that I find most exciting about that moment is it's sort of like dancing with a woman for the first time. You don't know what the rhythm is going to be. Is it going to work? But you do your best to be discreet and gracious, And the traits that allow you to cross that barrier between an outsider to someone who's welcomed as a guest are the same traits that would make me welcome in your home at Thanksgiving dinner. Good manners, self-deprecating humor, a willingness to eat what's put in front of me and sleep where I'm asked to sleep. The basic traits of human character. And that's part of that is because hospitality is the international language. And one of the things that's so fascinating about culture is that much as anthropologists celebrate the wonder of diversity, there is also the miracle of our commonality.
So while scrolling through Vanishing Cultures, I couldn't help but notice the intensity and focus on faces throughout your photography. Wow, was that the original idea of it, or just kind of the will of your camera lens?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of, Robert Capa famously said of photography, if you don't like photographs, get closer. And I think that when people are taking portraits, one mistake that people make is sort of, because they're either uncertain or they're discreet, they don't want to sort of enter the other person's physical space, get too close. They tend to sort of stand back and then spend a whole lot of time, setting things up. Well, that setting things up is what really intimidates people in a sense. And if I want to take a portrait of you, well, one portrait could be in the studio, could be very nice, but if all this was white sky, why would I want that? I want this, right?
Yeah.
And also the eyes, always the eyes too.
Is there a person that you've met throughout your travels that influenced you greatly?
Oh my gosh, I've been so lucky. I mean, one of the reasons I accepted UBC's offer of a professorship, I didn't need a job. I'd never had a job. I certainly didn't do it for the money. In fact, it was a financial sacrifice. I wanted to be able to do to young people what professors had done for me. I mean, my life is completely founded on serendipity. I became an anthropologist because the deadline was the next day at university, and I had just come out of the Peabody Museum of Ethnology for the first time. My head was filled with all these images, and I ran into a friend in the street, and I said, "Stuart, what are you going to declare tomorrow's your major?" And he said, "Anthropology." And I said, "Like Forrest Gump, what's that?" And he said, "You studied Indians." And like Forrest Gump, I said, "That'll do." And I hired on as a student of anthropology. And after about 2 years, I was tired of just reading about Native people in books. I wanted to live with Native people. And I was in a cafe in Harvard Square with my roommate, who was also a student of anthropology. And there was a National Geographic map of the world right in front of us. And suddenly David looked at the map, and he looked at me, he looked at the map, he looked at me, and he pointed to the high Arctic, and he looked at me. Well, I had to go somewhere. And I watched my left arm lift, and it hit the Amazon. Had it hit Italy, I might have become a Renaissance scholar. But having decided to go to the Amazon in the spur of the moment, there was only one man to see, Professor Schultes, this legendary plant explorer who shot blowguns in class and kept outside his door a bucket of peyote buttons available to the students as an optional laboratory experiment.
Oh my goodness.
A man for whom mountains have been named in South America. I mean, the greatest Amazonian explorer of the 20th century. And I just knocked on his door and said, I've saved up money in a logging camp. I want to go to the Amazon and collect plants. And without asking me my credentials, he just looked across a mountain of specimens and said, well, son, when do you want to go?
After writing The Serpent and the Rainbow, what did you want the readers to take away and have resonating in their minds?
Well, you know, Hemingway said that anyone who thinks that writing is easy is either a bad writer or a liar. And I think that to maintain oneself through the arduous process of writing a book, you really have to be passionate about it. You know, the other thing Hemingway said is that the most important credential for a writer is to have something to say the world needs to hear. And all my books have had that theme to them. So in that sense, what I wanted people to come away with was not the conclusion, oh, some scientist has proven that zombies exist. Because in fact, I never really did that. What I ended up doing was that I was sent down to find the pharmacological basis of a social event, but no drug can make a social event, you know what I mean? And I found myself really exploring these social, psychological, historical, political dimensions of a chemical possibility, and in doing so, celebrating the legitimacy of the voodoo religion and the voodoo culture.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of the movie?
I wasn't pleased about the movie. I mean, I never said anything publicly against it, really, because I became very good friends with Bill Pullman, the guy who played me, and David Ladd, who produced it, still a very dear friend. Wes Craven was a great guy, just passed away. Look, you know, when you write a book and you sell it to Hollywood, you have to expect them to do what they're going to do with it. I mean, you hope they won't ruin it, but it becomes a director's project. And you know, Faulkner was asked what he thought of what Hollywood did to his books, and he pointed to his bookshop and said, "He didn't do anything to my books." Right? And that book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, continues to sell about 5,000 copies a year, and we're now, 30 years since its publication.
Do you have hope for the future, and what advice would you give to young people who are kind of feeling discouraged about the state of the world right now?
You know, I'm a father of young women. How could I not be hopeful? You know, my father, who was not a religious man, believed deeply in good and evil. And he used to always say, you know, evil's not going to disappear. And even like, for example, Lord Krishna, when he was asked by a disciple, why is there evil in the universe? Lord Krishna said to thicken the plot. In other words, good and evil, light and darkness, those polarities, those oppositions, have been with human beings for all time. And my father used to say that, you know, you're not going to vanquish evil, but you do have the possibility of leaning into the wheel of good and moving it forward. Moving it forward. I mean, I think that's the dance of life. So to be obsessively pessimistic is to somehow be surprised that there's evil in the universe. No. I mean, my perspective is very much more a Buddhist perspective, that suffering is not negation. Ignorance is not, stupidity. It's a tendency to cling to the cruel illusion of our own centrality in the stream of divine existence. So, I feel that you have one life to lead, and you just have to be on the side of good and righteousness, and people all know what that means.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming and listening and talking.
Yeah,
and
you
everything.
bet. My pleasure.
It's fantastic.
Joy to be with you. Good luck.